like a tree is nourished by his roots. His roots grow in different parts of the world. The branches of his family tree spread out over thousands of years and kilometers. But he considers himself a son of the Kazakh land, the land where the nomads of the Great Steppe reached the highest goals. Arman Umarkojeev, traveler, historian, archaeologist in the new season of the Dala project.
What attribute is a symbol of imperial or royal power? Why were the Saka Tigra Howdah named that way? And what part of the national costume is the most ethnographic, informative and authentic? To give you a hint on what this episode will be about, we will conduct a small experiment.
Итак, конечно, все уже догадались.
Of course, everyone was able to guess that today we will talk about headdresses, and more precisely, the traditional headdresses of the peoples of Central Asia. We will learn more about their history, role, meanings, features, and similarities. To help us navigate through that, we invited an international expert in the history of costume, archaeologist and restorer Tatyana Krupa.
Tatyana Krupa, historian, archaeologist, head of Umay Marghulan Center International Research Laboratory at Pavlodar Pedagogical University, one of the world's leading specialists in the preservation and restoration of antiquities, member of the UK Community of Costume Specialists, Global Heritage Fund's expert, member of the European Association of Archaeologists. If we talk about symbols of power, at different times, different people had completely different types of hats. This is actually a great topic for research. Long story short, European headdresses were primarily characterized as a round frame with a textile insertion surrounded by a crown of metal and precious stones. You can see examples of this in any modern European museum you can visit. If we talk about Asia, then turbans were the symbols of power. And here we can notice an ideological conflict. When Europeans encountered representatives of Eastern cultures, say the steppe nobility, and they took off their hats, the steppe nobility did not understand such etiquette. But on the other hand, when they wanted to humiliate the ambassadors, what did they do? They forced them to take off their hats. It was a tremendous disrespect towards the ambassadors, which often ended in wars.
Неуважение к послам, которые часто чем закончились войнами.
If we talk about ancient times, then we can recall the tradition of an antique wreath. I am very well versed in this topic as an archaeologist, a historian of antiquity. The Romans loved wreaths. Just remember the emperor's parade. There was always a man on a chariot standing behind the emperor, holding a golden wreath. Julius Caesar loved to wear a golden wreath all the time from a certain point. The thing is that with age, men lose part of their hair, and Julius Caesar took this very hard. Ancient authors such as Plutarch or Suetonius write about it plainly. Moreover, the wreath in ancient times was also a symbol of funeral paraphernalia.
But what about the Olympic champions of the past who wore a laurel wreath on their heads?
Yes, absolutely. A laurel wreath. A wreath, as the mark of a winner, runs like a red thread through the entire Roman history. And, of course, gold. Because the wreath was supposed to be worn with an appropriate clothing. For example, the so-called toga palmata, which was usually embroidered with gold, just like these pieces next to us in the studio. Moving on, if we talk about the symbols of power closer to our territory, then this is a huge Scythian Saka community, that is the early Iron Age.
Железный век.
Когда реконструктор этого головного убора Данияр Байдаралин подарил мне его,
When restorer Daniyar Baydaralin gifted me this reconstructed headdress, he put it on my head, saying that now, like a real Saka tribesman, I have a connection with Tengri himself. Because this headdress symbolizes the mountain on top of which the gods live. All the restorers with whom I spoke unanimously said that red was a favorite color among the Saka Tigra Hauda. They used it almost everywhere, in clothes, in household items, in jewelry, even burial chambers were painted red.
тоже окрашивались в красный цвет.
Дело в том, что
The people of the Scythian Saka era were very fond of red as a symbol of power, a symbol of prosperity, of the sun, of the triumph of life.
в жизни
Я вот с красным, знаете, бы так сказал, что
I would even say that red is the color of blood. And what is blood? It's energy, it's life force, so when a person wore red, he was full of life force.
One does not contradict the other. Blood as a symbol of life, color as a symbol of life. It only carries a positive meaning.
возраст его
A hat like this is about 3,000 years old. Has this headdress subsequently served as the basis for the creation of some other modern headdresses?
вспомним опять-таки наших алтын-адамов, которые у нас несколько.
Let us recall the several Altyn Adam burials that have been found on the territory of Kazakhstan, all of which had high-frame headdresses, including female burials. In fact, there are several types of such frame hats, which all line up together. If we take the Urjar princess, the so-called Khansha, who was found by Timur Smagulov in Urjar and was studied and reconstructed by Krym Altynbekov, if we take the golden man from the Issyk mound with all the attributes, then, through the Middle Ages, we reach the modern Central Asian ethnography, and Kazakh ethnography in particular.
Исык со всей атрибутикой. Через Средневековье мы переходим к современной центральноазиатской и, прежде всего, казахской этнографии. Если обратиться к Кимак-Кипчакскому времени или же, допустим,
If we turn to the Kimak-Kipchak period, or let's say the Golden Horde period, about which a lot of material has been accumulated, we again run into these high-frame headdresses. It is wrong, in my opinion, to reduce all this to exclusively Mongolian influence. On the one hand, we have these high boot-shaped gugu hats that come to us with the traditions of the Golden Horde, come from the Yuan territory. And on the other hand, we also know of hats that had a different shape, that came to the Golden Horde culture from the earlier time. One of such headdresses is in my laboratory. It was found on the territory of Pavlodar region in the Mokur burial ground, which was excavated by Timur Smagulov, the director of the Margulan Center. And this is the only headdress to date that is archaeologically intact with all its details. I took its measurements and made a light, so to speak, reconstruction, so that all the connected parts were visible. So it does not have this boot shape, which is characteristic of gugu hats. But it has all the signs of the Polovtsian culture of Eastern Europe of the 12th and 13th centuries, which is pre-Mongolian time. And if we build on this, we come across modern Kazakh ethnography, which preserves the trains, which preserves the decor, which preserves the very architecture of this headdress. Do you understand? But nobody worked with this topic in such a context.
Который сохраняет эти шлейфы, который сохраняет декор, который сохраняет саму архитектуру этого головного убора. Но этой темой никто в таком контексте не занимался.
It is the saukele that inspires the masters who created wedding garments. And not only them, the jewelers also inspired to adorn these headdresses in precious stones.
And this is wonderful. After all, this headdress had a certain sacredness to it. And we know that it is connected, among other things, with ethnographic perception.
I know girls only wore it once, for a very special occasion.
Выходя замуж,
When getting married, some sub-ethnic groups of Kazakhs wore it for a year until the first child was born.
первенства.
Ну вот вам как специалист,
As a specialist in the history of costume, as a fashion designer even, what do you find the most interesting? What is sacred about the saukele?
говорите, в Саукеле.
Вы знаете, не так давно мне
You know, not so long ago, I had an opportunity to try a saukele on. For a long time, I doubted whether I should do it. But let me tell you why I still got the nerve and did it. The thing is that when you put on a headdress, you begin to understand many things about it. How to move in it, how to bow in it. After all, the height of a saukile is 70 centimeters or higher. And don't get me started on the weight. It weighs from 2 to 8 kilograms. If it has silver, then it's 8 kilograms. You stretch along the vertical axis. That is, you become straighter, your posture improves. Saukiles are always red, because red is the color of a wedding, of a celebration. Red is a perfect background for gold and silver embroidery. It always looks brilliant and beautiful. William of Rubruck wrote that he met women who rode horses while wearing high headdresses. And now imagine that you need to trot or gallop on a horse in this headdress, which raises the question, should there be fixators here? I think they should. Right now I'm translating a fragment from Latin, which has significant inaccuracies in current interpretations. For example, he writes that they wore high headdresses, which are pulled together with a fur hat. The word translated by the translator as fur hat is almuse. Rubruck is a representative of the early 13th century. Look, everyone knows the Soviet movie The Three Musketeers, right? Cardinal Richelieu walks around in such a cape with a hood. This is the almuse. It could be fabric, fur, or whatever, but it's not a fur hat, as it was translated. I am preparing a large publication on this matter. You need to carefully read and understand what the person wanted to say.
Надо внимательно читать и понимать, что хотел сказать человек.
Borik, a Kazakh national headdress. Of course, you know that there is a male version and a female version. The Kazakhs have a lot of saying using this Kazakh headdress, using the word borik. For example, there is a saying, a person should not be judged by his hat.
Это тоже достаточно старая разновидность головного убора традиционно. Если вспомнить советскую моду...
This is also a fairly old version of a traditional headdress. If we recall the Soviet fashion of women's hats, these heads with edging, the fact is that they too were borrowed by fashion designers from Central Asian traditional ethnography. And there is nothing surprising here. The top of this headdress, whether for men or women, is made from expensive fabrics. Because, as a rule, such a headdress involves either a ceremonial camisole or a ceremonial chapan, or, even better, a ceremonial shik, a fur coat. A woman's buruk has more expensive fabrics and maybe embroidery. A male buruk is more modest. By the way, a funny thing in the context of history is the monomach's cap. It's not even a male headdress, it's a female one, which, for some reason, has become a symbol of male power. How did this happen and why? Well, this was the period of formation of Muscovy as a state. And taking into account the fact that these principalities did not apparently have enough craftsmen, for a number of reasons, when people came across such unusual headdresses, they decided to use them.
В этих княжествах не хватало по ряду причин и умельцев таких, когда попадали вот такие необычные.
It was an exotic item for them.
Дорогая вещь, которую по одной из версий привезла одна из...
Yes, an expensive imported item, which, according to one version, was brought by a Khanshah who got married into the duchy. Such headdresses were passed down, and apparently they were so unique that the people decided to crown the first Russian Tsar with such a crown, which was unlike anything around. From the point of view of the history of costume and the history of fashion, this is nonsense, this is dissonance. But you can't throw words out of a song. It's just like with the wreath of Julius Caesar.
Венком Юлия Цезаря.
Let's come from the height of celebration down to earth and talk about the most popular and symbolic headdress for all Turkic peoples, the tubiteka, although this word itself gravitates towards height. The root tube is of Turkic origin, which literally translates as the peak, but different nations have their own names for this cap. We, the Kazakhs, call it takiya.
Они все уписываются вот в эти вот круглые каркасные.
They all fit into the round frame hats. The Uzbeks have duppi, the Kyrgyz have tubete, the Crimean Tatars have fez. This, by the way, is a female fez. Many mistakenly believe that the fez is a male attribute. Here you see a classic Crimean Tatar fez made by the famous gold embroiderer Elmira Kataki. This is the Crimean Tatar mukhlama. None other than Ulviya Ablaeva, a leading specialist in Crimean Tatar headdresses, who defended dissertations on this topic, gifted me this fez. I am, as they say, of the age when one should wear neutral colors. That's why I chose this color for myself. This part of the fez was often decorated with a topelek, a separate piece made of silver and filigree. Travelers from medieval Europe perceived it in the context of their own worldview, right? And they considered it a sort of a crown. Today, many Crimean Tatar women wear it with a marama on top. Marama is a special kind of white fabric. It's usually embroidered. It's a ceremonial piece of an attire.
Такая белая ткань, кисия, ну, условно назовем ее так, вышитая, парадная.
I noticed that there are different shapes. There are cone-shaped hats, round ones, the one you have,
The flat one.
with a flat top, with an angle. I also saw quadrangular ones.
Which fold nicely.
Why are there so many types?
Понятие красоты присуще разным.
People have different perceptions of beauty, and the decor often required a different design approach.
Разного подхода, ну, дизайнерского.
The shape of a tubiteka can be completely different even within one country. For example, in the south of Tajikistan, male toki have round tops, while in the north they have square tops. And Tajiks can understand what region a person is from based on the shape of the toki.
Ну, так это ж как бы замечательно.
Isn't that wonderful? The same happens in Uzbekistan and other countries. These are a sort of calling cards, which is why each region developed their own style so that they could see their own.
Чтобы свой своего мог увидеть.
I saw that girls in Uzbekistan also like wearing this type of hats, but they are very bright and painted.
Я думаю, что в казахской этнографии тоже.
I think that in Kazakh ethnography too, the takya that girls wore also had regional meanings.
Они тоже имели региональные значения.
Сама форма головного убора, она, конечно, очень сильная.
The very shape of a headdress, of course, has a symbolic meaning, not to mention what it is inlaid with and what patterns it has. Can you elaborate on the symbolism of headdresses?
Головных уборов.
Когда мы говорим, что шанарак это голова юрты.
There's a saying that Shanarak is the head of a yurt. That means that the headdress is a derivative. Its rounded shape as a symbol of supremacy, significance, unification of parts.
Верховенство, значимости, объединение частей.
Tubiteka is usually decorated with some kinds of amulets to protect from evil spirits.
От сглаза.
Вы знаете, так оно и есть. Дело в том, что все, что находится на головном уборе,
That is true. Everything that is on a headdress is an amulet, which can include sewn-on coins, silver items, which in itself are amulets. Turkmen headdresses have a tremendous amount of silver and gemstones, such as carnelian and turquoise. These stones have very strong protective powers. A lot of these items can be found on headdresses for women, including the saukile that we talked about today. They also have protective functions. Feathers can also be used as a decor. The Kazakh women like decorating with feathers, usually eagle owl feathers, but it doesn't mean that other feathers cannot be used. Let us again turn to the written sources and talk about the writings of another traveler from Tamerlane times, Rui González de Clavijo, who describes the feasts of Samarkand. I recently translated this whole fragment again. There, Kanyo, Tamerlane's wife, performed in a costume, which is described to include a tubiteka embroidered with various jewels. Here, Clavijo says that it's like the top of a mountain. Also, feathers were covering her face, and I think that it could be peacock feathers that are more than a cubit long. Having traveled around Kazakhstan, I saw little children wearing sewn-on feathers.
больше локтя длиной. Поездив по Казахстану, я такое видела, когда маленькие детки, они носят там пришитые перышко, всегда носят это все.
So, a headdress is some kind of an identification symbol, indicating whether you are a man or a woman, from the north or from the south, rich or poor, right?
При хане Узбеки Орда принимала.
Under Han Uzbek, the Golden Horde converted to Islam. Since then, a man is supposed to enter a mosque in a headdress. And today, we have a whole bunch of white hats. For men who put it on and go to the mosque, this is first of all a sacred headdress associated with Islamic tradition. The tubetekas that have Islamic symbols are already part of ethnography. Take, for example, the Kyrgyz ilichek. This is an incredibly interesting headdress. You have 25-30 meters of fabric wound on your head. This again changes your posture. And today, it's representative of the region. Take also the Kazakh kimeshek, on top of which a turban is put on. If we move away from the Turkic peoples, then the Ukrainians have also rushnik headdress. They are also representative of the region, as well as the age group. That is, this is a cross-cultural phenomenon, and one can often read the entire biography of a woman from these headdresses. What country did she come from? What clan or tribe?
И по этим головным уборам можно прочитать часто всю биографию женщины. С какого рода она вышла, из каких краев она пришла.
Этот кимешек на мне выполнен по образцу.
This kimeshek that I'm wearing is a replica of an old kimeshek, which is over 100 years old. Each region had its own cut, its own kimeshek pattern. On top of a kimeshek, you are supposed to wear a kunduk, which is sometimes called a turban. The word kunduk comes from the word kun, meaning the sun. That is, it reflects the sun, as well as takes on the sun. But at the same time, the Kazakh woman had an expression, kundukteri kaykhayıp, which meant that the high kunduk on a woman conveyed her high status.
Высокий кундук на женщине, он ей придавал статусность.
In the 21st century, in the era of technology, gadgets and the internet, why do we need all this information?
Зачем нам вся эта информация?
To be honest, I don't see any conflict. There is no conflict between hats and the internet at all.
People now wear a baseball cap, a universal, multi-purpose item.
Из Казахстана бейсболку, расшитую казахскими орнаментами, выполненную из войлока.
Once I brought a baseball cap from Kazakhstan, embroidered with Kazakh ornaments and made of felt. On the one hand, the shape was borrowed from a Western culture, but on the other, the craftspeople who sewed this incorporated the traditional influences into this headdress. Where is the conflict here? There is none. I do not see any dissonance. They complement each other. They balance the costume. I can put on a scarf to complement my outfit. You, sitting in jeans, can put on any headdress you want, a tubiteka or, say, a buruk. You can wear a malachai in winter. Winters in Pavlodar, for example, can reach negative 45 degrees Celsius, and malachai is an excellent way to protect your body from the cold, even today. Why can't I put on this headdress to go with this modern suit? First of all, it's beautiful. Secondly, it's unique. You know, in the modern world full of limitless information, it's very important to understand our roots. The young people nowadays are very fond of gray, white, and black colors, of oversized clothes. As a fashion historian, I look at these faded colors and perceive them as depressing colors. A tiny person is lost against the backdrop of a giant metropolis, and they add white, black, and gray colors to this. This is why when I'm in a bad mood, for example, when I feel down and depressed, I always try to put on a bright scarf, like a traditional Azerbaijani kelagay. Therefore, it is very important that there be a color that would give you energy.
Это очень важно, чтобы был цвет, который давал заряд бодрости.
Япония – символ самых передовых технологий.
Japan, a symbol of the most advanced technologies, remains in our perception the land of the rising sun, thanks to the kimono and many other traditional items. The world is, first of all, interested in our culture and our traditions, because they highlight our identity. Let us not forget this.
Будем помнить об этом.